I've been writing about immigration for about 2 decades now, and while this is not an issue that brings out the better angels of Americans ever, I don't think I have ever seen the debate quite this polarized. Part of the reason is that the advent of new media has polarized the issue by allowing non-mainstream voices to speak loudly and to build support for their position. So on one hand, you have websites such as We Dare and conservative radio talk shows whipping up restrictionist sentiment. On the other hand, you have now a significant number of voices making the case for various versions of open borders. Now, given this background, a proposal to regionalize our immigration system along the lines that Brandon suggested offers a Solomon-like solution, in my view. The big difference is that in this case, splitting the baby between Uncle Sam and the states is actually the wiser course of action. And there are plenty of reasons for this. The economic case for the proposal is pretty obvious, and Brandon laid it out. It'll allow states far greater flexibility to recruit foreigners who meet their particular needs, their labor needs, rather than some distant federal bureaucrats that are planning the labor market for the entire country without having the kind of local specific knowledge that is necessary to make good decisions. So no longer will Cupertino, California's needs for STEM graduates be prioritized over, say, Florida's needs for seasonal workers or farmhands, or mason and welders of a city experiencing a construction boom. One of the best things about the PNP program that Canada has adopted, and Brandon alluded to, is that it is not based on this one-size-fits-all economically meaningless distinction between high-skilled and low-skilled workers. In fact, I was talking to, researching a piece I was working on, I was talking to an immigration lawyer in one of the provinces, and I kept talking to him about high-skilled workers. And he kept talking about plumbers and welders, and I didn't know what the disconnect was. Then it turned out in his particular province, welders and mason work is actually regarded as high-skilled work. So they talk about this extremely differently from the way we do, and I think they talk about it more rationally than we do. We can talk more in the question and answer period, about this particular issue, but I want to, in my time here, I want to basically focus on 5 non-economic benefits of a more federalized, state-based approach. And David Letterman's style, I'll go from the least to the most important. One is that it would reduce federal coercion and encourage state cooperation. There is not only a mismatch between the kinds of immigrants that states want, but also the numbers in which they want it. There is a disagreement among states about how to actually handle immigrant flows. So consider 2 neighboring states, Arizona and Utah. Arizona wants to stop poor Mexicans streaming across its border, and Utah wants to redirect this stream to its own borders. Both of them are at the mercy of Uncle Sam. Arizona is discovering that its efforts to snag undocumented aliens not only give it a reputation for nastiness, but also opens it to legal lawsuits from the feds when it crosses its will. Meanwhile, Utah, whose legislature 3 years ago passed a compact asking Congress for a waiver to carry out a more compassionate and employer-friendly program, is still waiting for the go-ahead. There are 2 key aspects to Utah's program. One would allow illegals to stay in Utah as guest workers if they submit to a background check, pay a fine, and demonstrate a proficiency in English. The other would let Utah residents sponsor undocumented immigrants in order to allow them to work in Utah. In a federalized approach, where each state had more say in setting its own immigration policy, the illegal problem could solve itself through mutual cooperation between the states, something that Brandon alluded to. They could have compacts, they could have, 3 states could get together and agree to share the immigration population, what have you. Utah's residents could sponsor, in this case, if they could get the federal government to give them permission, it could sponsor Arizona's illegals, taking them off Arizona's hands, allowing both states to get their preferred outcome. Arizona wouldn't be subjected to federal wrath, and Utah wouldn't be subjected to federal foot dragging. Both would be able to control their immigration destinies a lot more, making the issue far less acrimonious and far more harmonious. The second advantage of a federalized system would be that it would make our immigration conversation more pleasant and humane without any self-righteous finger-wagging from progressives. One of the most striking aspects about the immigration debate in Canada and America is that they're totally opposite postures and tones. In America, the land of immigrants, ironically enough, immigrants have come to be regarded as foes of the country rather than its friends. The entire conversation is dominated by an enforcement-first approach, and the conversation is about how to crack down on the illegals here, how to crack down on employers through an e-verify system, how many barbed fences would be enough, and if we can get the immigrants here to self-deport, voluntarily self-deport. I think that was Mitt Romney's term of art. In Canada, however, the focus is on how do we recruit the people we want. While America is busy building fences, Canadian provinces are dispatching recruiters all over the world, selling their provinces to prospective residents, kind of like companies go around college campuses recruiting students. The beauty of the PNP program is that it hasn't made provinces immigrant-friendly by singing John Lennon's Imagine to them. It has given provinces more control over their immigration policies and changed their incentives. Provinces are certainly free to turn away immigrants if they don't want them. But doing so comes with an economic price because businesses are likely to locate to those places where labor is more plentiful. This will mean loss of jobs, tax revenue, population for places that are more hostile to immigrants. Because provinces can control immigration flows to avoid strain on their public goods, there is no downside to immigration for them, only an upside. Hence, they compete with each other to spread out the welcome mat rather than build more walls. It would change our immigration conversation considerably from enforcement to recruitment if we could move to a state-based system. The third reason to allow for a federalized system would be that it would allow the states to answer their own existential question as to which void they want immigrants to fill for them. In America, various factions are always warring over what exactly the purpose of immigration policy is. Some believe that immigrants should be recruited to fill some precise economic need. Others advocate a strong focus on family reunification in order to strengthen and honor America's commitment to the institution of the family. Reihan has written very powerfully about the need for prioritizing high-skilled immigration over family-based one. Under a more federalized system, each state can decide for itself. Now, one caveat that Brandon alluded to, and I'll mention, ultimately, I believe, with the exception of minor children or elderly parents, most immigrants come to Canada or America for economic opportunity. There is really no other reason. I mean, even those who come here for asylum purposes wouldn't stay here if there wasn't an economic climate that could absorb them. So if economic opportunities don't exist in certain places, immigrants are unlikely to come, or if they come, they won't stay. This is why immigration flows are actually fairly self-regulating. But that's also the reason I'm very skeptical about the workability of Michigan Governor Rick Snyder's scheme to recruit immigrants for urban renewal purposes in Detroit. But just because immigrants want to come for economic reasons does not mean that states can't have some other purpose as well in mind when they try to recruit them. So for example, in Canada, provinces recruit immigrants with an eye towards nurturing or strengthening some ethnic, cultural, or linguistic end. Quebec wanted to import more French speakers in order to buttress the French-speaking population. Other provinces have large German and Eastern European populations, and they want to strengthen their cultural ties with those parts of the world and also provide a support base for the new immigrants and allow them to be more successful. So they go to those countries to recruit. Now, one might disagree with some of these ends, and I certainly do, but nobody can disagree that it's a good thing that provinces have the flexibility to choose their ends. In America, on the other hand, Uncle Sam decides for all states what their ends are to be, and everybody has to then fall in line. The fourth reason for why this would be a good system is it would actually turn states into laboratories of democracy on immigration policy, as sort of the founders envisioned. If you've been covering immigration for as long as I have, you know that yet another study on whether immigrants complement native skills or compete with them, create or cost native jobs, will not settle this debate. And Reihan will, I think, get into that a little bit more. The evidence that scientific studies produce, while important, always has and always will be contested when policy is based on it, especially when the stakes are high and people can't opt out of whatever it is that Washington decides for them. In a federalized system, each state will be able to field test its own hunch. And if two very comparable states like Utah and Arizona opt for widely different immigration approaches, we'll get something resembling a controlled lab experiment in the real world whose results will be instructive for everyone. This is completely hypothetical, but I would imagine that over time, immigration policies of various states would converge as states voluntarily emulate the lessons of their more successful years. It might take many decades for this to play out, but the end result will be achieved with relatively less acrimony than if the federal government had tried to impose the same solution top-down.